Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. A 12-member jury has convicted former US President Donald Trump of all 34 counts in the hush money trial. Trump, who will be sentenced on the 11th of July, was charged with falsifying business records. This makes Trump the first US president to be convicted of any crime. According to the prosecution, Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, paid off adult star Stormy Daniels $130,000 for her silence about her affair with Trump before the 2016 elections. Cohen added that Trump directed him to pay Daniels to prevent her from damaging his chances of winning the elections. The former president called the verdict a disgrace and maintains that he's innocent. He also claimed that the trial was rigged by a conflict judge who was corrupt. Meanwhile, Republican leaders reacted to the verdict, calling it the most shameful day in American history. The leaders also claimed that the judicial system has become corrupt and rigged under the Democrats and the Biden administration. So what does this really mean for the former president going forward, and how will this conviction impact his presidential bid, his second presidential bid? Joining us now to discuss this and more, Professor Jonathan Enton, Professor Emeritus at the School of Law at the Case Western Reserve. Professor Enton, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Let me begin by asking you, what were the grounds which really clinched this case against Donald Trump?
The prosecution put on a fair number of witnesses and a large number of documents to support their case. So they didn't rely only on Michael Cohen, who has a track record of not telling the truth. And so the prosecution was able to tell a fairly coherent story about how all of the facts fit together. And that's, I think, what really made the difference, particularly because the Trump defense team did not have as coherent a theory to explain what was going on. And although they don't legally have to have an alternative story, as a practical matter, in a criminal trial, the defense usually needs to have a reasonably good story in order to raise what the law calls reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors.
Right. Does this conviction come with a possible jail term? Can Donald Trump go to jail on these charges?
He could, in the sense that the law that he is accused of violating provides for a criminal sentence, but he very likely will not go to jail because this kind of law for a first offender, a nonviolent crime, generally it's unusual to have jail time. He is more likely to be fined and put on probation, which is pretty much the typical way that these kinds of first-time low-level nonviolent felony offenses are sentenced.
Right. Now, in terms of appealing this conviction and this possible sentence, what's the road ahead? What are the levels that he can appeal on?
Well, there are two levels of appeal within the New York State court system. There is an intermediate court of appeals, and that's where the case will go in the first instance. Then, if Trump loses at the intermediate court, he can file an additional appeal to the highest court in New York State. And as a practical matter, the highest court in New York State is the last word on the meaning of state law, and this case arose under state law. If Trump loses at that level, he could try to get the U.S. Supreme Court to review the case, although he would have to raise a kind of federal constitutional objection to his conviction in order for the U.S. Supreme Court to hear it.
Right. We also read reports coming out of the U.S. that this doesn't really disqualify him from fighting the presidential elections once again, and there's no law within the Republican Party which disqualifies him from fighting for elections once again. But does this impact his credibility? Will the Republican lawmakers, will the Republican Party be forced to rethink, or there is no such measure?
Well, I think it's very unlikely that the Republican Party will rethink its view of Trump. Trump's claim all along has been that this was a bogus charge and a rigged trial, and Republican leaders around the country seem to be rallying to that narrative. Where it might matter is for the comparatively small number of undecided voters for whom the conviction might tip their decision away from Trump. Now, whether that means that they would vote for President Biden or for a third-party candidate or an independent such as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is another matter. But I think for the most part, the conviction is likely to harden the views of people who like Trump and harden the views of people who don't like Trump. But there are a few folks in the middle where it could make a difference.
All right, the swing voters, so to say. Are there more criminal cases which Donald Trump is facing right now, where the trial or the sentencing, the conviction could happen now?
Well, Trump is facing three other trials. One in Georgia, where he is accused of trying to interfere with the vote count in the 2020 election. That's a state case. And then he is facing two federal criminal cases, one in Washington, D.C. that is connected to the January 6th events, and another one in Florida, which involves his keeping classified documents at Mar-a-Lago after he left the White House. But it does not seem as though any of those trials will happen before the election. And for that matter, I think it's not clear whether we'll get a decision on Trump's appeal in the New York case before the election. It just the process, it takes a certain amount of time. So I think this is likely the only trial that will happen before the election.
Right. So clearly it seems the Democrats have got a lot of ammunition in this election to attack Donald Trump and the Republican Party and tell their voters that this is the kind of person you would be electing if you vote for him. Do you think that this conviction gives Democrats an edge in the upcoming polls?
It might help them to some extent, but keep in mind that most Democrats already had a very low opinion of President Trump based on on his record when he was in office before and the sorts of things he's been saying for the last several years as he's campaigned for the Republican nomination this time around. So will it make a big difference? I'm not sure. It might make some difference. But Trump is the sort of candidate where very few people are neutral. And that was true even before this conviction.
Right. Professor Enton, thank you very much for joining us on Global Eye, explaining us the ramifications of the Trump conviction in the United States and what it means for his presidential bid. Thank you once again for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
On that note, we take a short break, but don't go anywhere. We will get you the latest on the elections in South Africa, in Mexico, and we'll also tell you about the Pakistan Prime Minister's upcoming visit to China.